Hey, welcome. I'm Lee Kellogg, and thank you for joining me today on our nature journaling safari. Today we are going to go explore some of the evergreen trees that are around the Roundhouse, which is the Capitol building in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We'll go look at sizes and shapes and needles and cones and all kinds of stuff. So let's go do it. So let's not forget about trees. I tend to get focused on the shrubs and the flowering bushes because they're so much more fun to sketch and easy. Sometimes we've got tree shapes that confuse us and we're not too sure what to do. So here we're looking at a couple of different kinds of trees planted in a grouping, and I think we've got some sort of sequoia on the right and then a spruce on the left. And that's my guesses on that one. But you can see the two different shapes, how the sprucey tree is sort of different shaped and the sequoias are more pyramid and conical. All right, so this is the spruce tree, and it's actually, all the branches are up above my head, so it's a little hard for me to show you. But spruces, when you shake hands with them, they're prickly. They prick you. Whereas, like if you run into a Douglas fir, it's sort of soft. A noble fir will be prickly, but it's also the fir, how the fir needles grow on the branches. In spruce here, they are growing all the way around the branch. So you know that's what makes it a spruce. And we can look at its trunk. We'll get closer. That's always a good way to help tell trees, is looking at their trunks. So that's a very typical of a spruce trunk, sort of, I don't know, cracked earth looking type of trunk. And then we're going to go over here and look at these interesting cedar trees. I think they're cedars. I'm going to have to look these guys up, and I'll do a little segment. I'll insert it after this. But look at the trunk on that tree. That is just like so different. And I am really not familiar with these trees. They're out of my normal habitat range, but I'm really thinking they are in the Juniper family. Juniper cedar-ish. Their trunks don't look like most of the western red cedars that I'm used to, so I don't know what they are, but we'll figure that part out. And they look soft. Their branches look all soft and not, but they're prickly. They're prickly like a cedar or like a juniper. So there you are. So something new, you know, just exploring a place I've worked 2 blocks from for almost 20 years, and I have never walked around and looked at the trees and the plants here. So see, you never know where you can end up going to journal. Okay, so I have another tree. This is a pine, and I am looking 15 to 20 feet above me. So I'm looking at the bark. I can tell it's a pine by how it's blooming, that's bark. And we've got small needle clumps that I can see from here. So sometimes you have to identify things from a distance. You can say, okay, yeah, I know it's a pine tree. I don't know what kind. We'll see if we can figure it out another time. But oh, they're so pretty. It's just fun looking at all the trees and figuring things out. Okay, we're back on the other side of the pine trees, so the light's a little different. I found a needle clump. They're 2 short needles. They're about 1.5 to 2 inches long. So we have enough to identify this tree. These 3 trees in front of us are sequoias. They're just so distinctive in how they look and their shape. And it's also, I grew up with them. We had sequoias in Portland, Oregon, where I grew up. So we'll go closer and look at the needles and look at the trunks just to verify what we're looking at. So there's the trunk of the tree. And you can see it's been trimmed out underneath, obviously, removing the dead limbs. Now we're going to go right over to the branches, to the leaves, the needles as they are. These are magnificent trees. So I found one more tree I have to talk about. This is a juniper, and once again I'll have to identify it later in the video. I'll tell you what they are once I get home and can look them all up. I am guessing that this juniper produces pollen and fruits on the same tree. We have one seed juniper, which I did a posting on, around our neighborhood that's male and female. So I don't know if what we're seeing here, if these little brown things are the blossoms that are falling off. I'm thinking they are the pollen sacs, and then we've got the fruit. These are last year's fruit, last year's cones, and this is very, very cool that this type of juniper has this. And you can see some other ones. There's an older one where it's opened up and further in on the branch. So just very, very cool seeing all of these. So as I bring this segment on trees to a close, you can see the roundhouse building there in the background. And all of these trees that we've been looking at have just been in the grounds of the roundhouse, where I've been talking about all these different types of conifer trees, evergreens. There are lots of deciduous trees. You can see most of them aren't leafed out yet, that I haven't even begun to talk about. We'll come back and look at the different deciduous trees in a couple of weeks when they get their leaves. But you can see the different shapes of trees. So when you draw trees, bear in mind each tree has a distinctive shape, and it talks to you about the habitat that the tree lives in, what kind of tree it is, how it reproduces, just all of those things are contributing to the shape of the tree. So here are my journal pages from our evergreen trees at the roundhouse. And this first page is the grouping that we first looked at, with the Engelmann spruce on the left and the giant sequoias on the right. The ponderosa pine that I talked about in the video is actually behind the sequoias, and I didn't put them in this rendering. The sequoias are pretty distinctive. At one point I talked about them maybe being a juniper, and that is just like so wrong. And I knew instantly when I saw them the first time they were sequoias, and then I started thinking about it and I thought too hard. That's one of the problems when you start thinking too hard, is that you start making mistakes. And here's the second page that I did in my journal that's got 3 different trees, and one of them, it's, once again, I called it a juniper, and it's actually a cypress. That'll be the one on the left, and it's the one with the funky round seed pods, which is not a tree I'm overly familiar with, especially here. And one of the things I learned about the roundhouse, when it was built, it was all grass, and it was employees who worked in the building who started planting all the trees and plants that we see today. So the building was built in 1966. So almost all the trees came as seedlings from somebody else's yard. And so what else do I have here? I have a ponderosa pine, which I talked about in the previous clip with behind the sequoias. And then on the right, I thought they were lodgepole pines. I was just sort of guessing. It's like, oh, lodgepole pines or coast pines like you see on the Oregon coast, Pinus contorta. And it turns out I was wrong, because while I was editing the videos, I saw the bark. And remember how I talked about the bark being important? The bark made it a Scotch pine. So both of those trees have tiny needles, or about 2-inch long needles, groups of 2, smaller pine cones, but it's that bark that was the key to the Scotch pine. So there you go. And when you're doing journals, it's okay to correct your mistakes, which I've done here with the what I wrote down as a lodgepole and then changed it after I firmed up my ID. So do your journal pages. Have fun. So I'm Lee Kellogg, and thank you for joining me today on our little nature journaling with trees that you see around your buildings, in parks, around public buildings. Just look for trees, look at their shapes, look at how they grow, and think about how you draw the trees. And then to get more detailed, how many needles does a pine tree have? Does the pine tree in front of you have? What shape are its cones? How big are they? You know, those are all important details. What does the bark look like? So when you're trying to identify a tree, pay attention to the bark. You got to pay attention to the leaves. So we've got a multitude of deciduous trees around me that we'll have to come back and do. So you can find me, Lee, at leekellogg.com, or naturejournalingtours.com, which is where you'll find these blogs and the videos. See you next time.